The Chicago Bears head coaching vacancy is attracting some of the big name coaches that we definitely want them to interview, but it's also attracting interest from other available head coaches that the team really should steer clear from.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com, use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. On the show today, we check in on three names that have popped up in the Chicago Bears head coaching search. Not specifically because the Bears have said, hey, we're interested and are going to interview this coach, but because those coaches have either said directly or sources have said on their behalf that, oh, I'd be interested in that Chicago Bears job if they were interested in me. It feels like high school crush thing. It's like, oh, I mean, if they like me back, maybe I like them, but it's, if they're not, whatever. But that's what it feels like. And in particular, we're kind of getting the bottom of the barrel coaching candidates here that really you don't want to see anywhere near your Chicago Bears, and yet their names are entrenched in the mix here, mainly because they've probably pretty intentionally put their name out there to make it seem like, hey, they're in the mix, even if they're not actually in the mix. So we'll look at Kliff Kingsbury talking about wanting to get back to being a head coach, and the Caleb Williams connection there is obvious, but he's also pretty obviously not a good head coaching candidate for the Chicago Bears. We'll talk about Jon Gruden trying to get back in the NFL and reportedly interested in the Bears job. That one's pretty big and obvious, no thanks. And then Mike McCarthy. There's some murmurings that if the Cowboys fire Mike McCarthy, that he would be interested in the Chicago Bears job. And do the Bears want to be his third stop as a head coach? You take the cast off from the Green Bay Packers and the Cowboys? We'll talk about that a bit later on as well. But I want to start with Kliff Kingsbury because I think he's the name that might have the most sort of mainstream appeal as a head coach candidate. Largely, the two main reasons being the job he's done with Jayden Daniels this season with the Washington Commanders and his direct connections having worked with Caleb Williams at USC. Those are both reasonable, logical, valid reasons to be a Bears fan who has interest in Kliff Kingsbury. And I certainly think Kliff Kingsbury has a lot of value as an offensive coordinator. I think Kliff Kingsbury has done a lot of great things for Jayden Daniels and has had some successful offenses in the past. But I also think we've seen a pretty consistent pattern over the years of Kliff Kingsbury teams starting hot and crashing and burning at the end and finishing very cold. And if it happens once, maybe even twice, okay, maybe he's just unlucky or maybe injuries. Any individual season, you can come up with explanations or excuses or however you want to categorize them as to why things went sour. But when you see it consistently every year he's been in charge of a franchise, the common denominator is Kliff Kingsbury, and it feels like the kind of thing that there's always something going wrong, and he's the guy who's at the top of something always going wrong. It feels a little bit Eberflus-like in that regard. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the season when we were getting ready for the Bears-Commanders game, but it's worth checking in again on like how these collapses have gone for the Commanders. You look at, not for the Commanders, but for Kliff Kingsbury prior to coming to the Commanders. When you think about when he was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, he started that 2021 season 7-0. The Cardinals were the hot thing. Kyler Murray was going to win MVP. But the rest of the year, they went 4-7. The year before that, in 2020, they started 6-3. Kliff Kingsbury has unlocked Kyler Murray. They finished the rest of that year 2-5. Like a lot of these seasons, they start at or above or well above 500, and they finish the second half of the season is well below 500, and that averages out over the course of the year to he was 11-7 in 2021, and he was 8-8 in 2020. Like, it averages out to not being terrible seasons overall, but it's such a drastic collapse each and every year. Even back when he was at Texas Tech in 2016, 17, and 18, he started 3-1, 4-1, 5-2 each of those years. The last stretches of games, he ends up 2-6, 2-6, 0-5 over the final 8 and 5 games of those seasons. Like, every single year, college and NFL, multiple teams, multiple situations, you have Kliff Kingsbury teams falling off. And I don't think it's been exactly that this year with Washington, because they're going to make the playoffs and they're still a good football team. But like, the team started 7-2 and then lost 3 in a row. And Jaden Daniels very much fell out of favor in the Rookie of the Year race. Now, he might still win it, but Bo Nix kind of took over some of the attention there when he started playing well. Like, there was a drop off here. Jaden Daniels' numbers have been down since about week 10 compared to where they were in the first 9 or so weeks of the season. Like, up through the Bears game there, like, he was the hottest thing in the league, and then teams adjusted a little bit, and he hasn't quite gotten back to being as great as he's been. He's had obviously some good games and some rough games in there. You think back to the game against the Eagles. He threw a couple of iffy interceptions there in addition to some nice touchdowns in that game. Like, he hasn't been bad by any means. It hasn't been as stark as a drop-off as we've seen other Kliff Kingsbury teams, but he's the offensive coordinator, right? Not the head coach. There's an offsetting force of Dan Quinn there keeping things rolling in Washington. And so I just don't trust that Kliff Kingsbury is going to come into Chicago and be all of a sudden a better head coach. Like, it's only been like 2 full seasons since he's been the Arizona Cardinals head coach, right? 1 year with Caleb Williams and USC, and now 1 year with Washington. It would be one thing if he had 4 or 5 plus years as an offensive coordinator to kind of see what he has done wrong in the past and maybe run into more of these situations and have to adjust and maybe just sort of learn a bit more and get some more experience under some different head coaches and see how different leadership works, at the NFL level. But 1 year in Washington is not enough for me to say, all right, Kliff Kingsbury has figured it out, make him the head coach again, because I just don't see him being that ready. I think he was a disaster in a lot of ways in Arizona, and Cardinals fans were very, very happy to get rid of him. And 1 good year with Washington and 1 year with Caleb is not enough to say, all right, he's fixed and he's good to go now. And then that's the other thing. 1 year with Caleb Williams at USC, right? Like, this was not some coach who spent years and years and years molding Caleb Williams and their best friends. Like, they have a good relationship. And Caleb was asked about Kliff Kingsbury and had very nice things to say about him. But it was 1 year as basically like his quarterback's coach. Like, that to me is not compelling enough to say, yes, this is the guy who has to be the one to unlock Caleb Williams. Like, just because he has the relationship, get me the more steady, surefire offensive coordinator candidate, like someone like Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen, for example, like, who you've seen, do this consistently in an NFL level as a guy who can be a more surefire play caller that doesn't have sort of this stink of past head coach failures. We don't know whether Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen or whoever will or will not be a good head coach, but we've seen Kliff Kingsbury be a bad head coach. And so I'll rather take the devil I don't know there. Take the chances that Ben Johnson's the perfect guy as opposed to hoping that Kliff Kingsbury is something new or better this time around. That one is a little bit more gray. It's not so black and white on Kliff Kingsbury. There's arguments to be made. Maybe he could be the right coach there. I can't think of a single argument, though, in favor of bringing Jon Gruden in as Chicago Bears head coach. Yes, he's won a Super Bowl 2 decades ago, but that's about the end of the Jon Gruden argument there. But I kind of want to go through and make sure we remember exactly why, and don't let Jon Gruden just sort of like TikTok wash away his past here and why he belongs nowhere near this Chicago Bears head coaching search. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of this final week of football action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and it's a great way to have a little bit more fun with your games on Sunday. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform, not just for football, but basketball and in the baseball season, hockey. I mean, you name it, they've got a bunch of sports you can play with at PrizePicks. We got a special offer for Locked On Bears listeners. Download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first lineup. That's $50 instantly after any of your first lineups, win or lose. You're getting that $50 with our promo code LOCKEDONNFL with PrizePicks. Run your game. Locked On Bears is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best self. What do you want your 2025 story to be? And every January brings a new chapter, 365 blank pages waiting for you to fill. And if there's a part of your life that you want to rewrite, or maybe a plot twist you've been craving, why wait? Because life isn't about fleeting resolutions. It's about taking control and becoming the author of your own story. Think of therapy as your personal editor, helping you craft the life you deserve. It's not just for crisis situations. Therapy can help you develop healthier coping strategies, improve relationships, and empower you to be that best version of yourself. Whether you're facing a specific challenge or just looking for personal growth, therapy is a powerful tool to help guide your journey. I do online therapy, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and I really can't recommend doing it enough. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. It came out on Thursday that former NFL head coach Jon Gruden is, I guess, expected to be a hot coaching candidate, despite having an ongoing lawsuit with the NFL. I don't know if it's still ongoing, or if that's actually finally fully been settled. But NFL Network reported it initially earlier this week. I think Tom Pelissero, mentioned that multiple teams have looked into former NFL head coach Jon Gruden for their head coaching vacancies here. So this is not completely speculative, like hypothetically Jon Gruden thing. Like, we don't know the Bears specifically, but I don't think so. I don't think the Bears would do it, but it is, he is putting his name out there. And I honestly, I don't necessarily believe a ton that this to me sounds like the kind of story that Jon Gruden's camp, his agent, his whoever, that puts out and say, hey, let everyone know teams are interested in Jon Gruden, even if teams aren't actually interested in Jon Gruden. Like, the language there Tom Pelissero used was that teams are digging into Jon Gruden. What was the language? He said, multiple teams have looked into former head coach Jon Gruden for head coaching positions. I imagine they looked into it and said, oh yeah, he sent a bunch of racist and homophobic things in emails, and he hasn't had a winning season since 2008. End of discussion, move on. And you know what? If Kevin Warren Googled Jon Gruden, then you can say the Bears looked into hiring Jon Gruden. You know what I mean? Like, that's the bare minimum. What does looking into hiring Jon Gruden mean? A Google search of Jon Gruden emails? I looked into the Bears hiring Jon Gruden, and I was reminded of what he said in those emails, one of which was a super offensive racist trope about the head of the NFL Players Association, DeMaurice Smith, referring to the size of his lips being particularly large, and compared them to Michelin tires. Like, that's the level of direct, offensive, racist, and like old-timey racist too. Like, not even like sneaky, subtle, like use dog whistle language, like referring to somebody as like a thug, or like where you're not actually saying the thing, but you can imply based on what you're saying. Like, he just goes straight to like 1920s racist caricature type of language in these emails. And that's like, then you add on top of like a lot of homophobic language in the emails, misogynistic language in the emails. Like, it was bad enough that he resigned because of the emails, right? Like, this wasn't just like the emails were bad and then the Raiders fired him because the team was bad. Like, yes, the team was bad, but it was 5 games into the 2021 season. They were 3-2. Like, not that I think that Raiders team was going to go on some, playoff run, but they ended up finishing 10-7. They made the playoffs and lost in the first round. Like, that was, again, I don't want to say a good Raiders team, but it was not a terrible football team. Jon Gruden did not resign that season because the quality of play. It was like the firestorm around this stuff was too big, too hot for the Las Vegas Raiders to handle. What do you think that would happen if that was with the Chicago Bears? Do you know how much of a firestorm something like that would be? think about how we never even heard what happened with Alan Williams and everything that was swirling around that. This is like provable documents that were leaked that connected, it was an email sent from Jon Gruden to the other side. The other side, I don't remember who he sent the emails to, but like this was a super verifiable, important, big racist messaging in these emails. And like, yes, he apologized or whatever and says, I'm not racist or whatever, but like, I don't know that 2 years out of the NFL, all of a sudden he is a totally changed man who has learned that what he did was wrong and that he shall never have another racist, homophobic, or misogynistic thought or bone in his body. I think he's a guy who has posted videos on TikTok, has partnered up with Barstool, and has gone on a kind of a character rehabilitation tour and is trying to rebrand himself as he's a football guy, right? Like Jon Gruden, the got me feeling nicey videos. They're funny. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I appreciate what Jon Gruden has been able to do as a video content creator. If you separate the art from the artist for a moment there, like he's done a good job at social media. That does not make him not racist anymore. That does not make him not homophobic anymore. It doesn't make him not misogynistic anymore. Like, this guy is just not, his behavior has demonstrated him not being a good person, not being a human being that you want leading your locker room. A locker room, I should say, full of black players. The majority of the NFL is black. And you're going to hire that guy who is proven on record to email and say racist things to lead a locker room full of a majority black men. Like, is your black quarterback and your black general manager and your black team president going to all be on board with hiring the guy who referred to a Players Association leader in racist terms? Like, it's never going to happen for the Chicago Bears, and it shouldn't happen for any franchise. There shouldn't be a franchise that says, you know what, we're okay with that because we really want to hire Jon Gruden. Because, like, on the football side of it, again, I mentioned it earlier, the last time Jon Gruden had a winning season was 2008. He was with the Raiders for 2 years and technically was above 500 over those 2 years. He went 8-8 and then 3-2. I'm not counting 3-2 as a winning season. That's just the Vegas years. I guess when you talk about these 2 years in Oakland and then 2 years in Vegas, he finished with those 4 seasons. Let's see, 22 and 31. So well under 500. He went 4-12, 7-9, 8-8, 3-2. Like, he is not coaching winning football in the last decade and a half. Like, you know what I mean? 2008 was the last year. He was 9-7 his last year in Tampa Bay. And yeah, I know he won a Super Bowl in 2002. That's great. 20 years ago, he was a great coach. But we haven't seen Jon Gruden be a good coach since 2008, like a consistently good coach since 2008. A guy who hasn't been good any time recently, and he's got all the racism, homophobia stuff in there. Like, there's just no real redeeming quality to go get Jon Gruden right now, other than he's likable on camera. Sure. And if I'm Jon Gruden, why not just keep doing the media stuff? It's way easier. I mean, I'm sure he just loves the football, but like, absolutely nowhere near Jon Gruden with a 10-foot pole. I don't think the Bears have any interest in Jon Gruden. I don't think they should have any interest in Jon Gruden. I hope no teams have any interest in Jon Gruden. Like, he's had chances here. He's ruined it. And like, he's had multiple head coaching jobs before. It's okay. He doesn't deserve to get another one just because he's funny or whatever. Like, we can all just like move on from Jon Gruden and not let him back in the NFL. And he can do the media stuff or whatever he wants to do on the side. Who's ever willing to pay him and tune into that, that's fine. But the NFL does not need Jon Gruden, and the Chicago Bears certainly do not need Jon Gruden. That's easiest said and done here. The undesirable head coaching candidate that I think of this group has the strongest argument, but feels icky in its own way, is Mike McCarthy of the Dallas Cowboys, coming out, and he hasn't said it because he's still employed by the Dallas Cowboys, but reports being that if the Cowboys fire him, he'd be interested in this Chicago Bears job. But should the Bears be interested in giving Mike McCarthy his third head coaching job? We'll look at McCarthy's record and some of the optics around that, and whether or not this is something that would or wouldn't be an idea for the Chicago Bears next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And it's the #1 sportsbook because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So if you want to bet $5 on, say, this Bears-Packers game on Sunday, where the Bears are 10.5-point underdogs on the road. So if you want to bet the Bears to cover the spread there, or the upset straight up would be Bears plus 410, a big return on your money. And the over-under is set at 41.5. A $5 bet that hits on any of those or any of your other favorite teams or favorite sports, and they're going to add $250 in bonus bets on top of the winnings from that $5 bet. There's so many different ways to win on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Mike McCarthy can't say anything while he's still head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, but there's a certain expectation around the NFL, I think, that the Cowboys will likely part ways with him this season. The Cowboys are currently 7-9. They play the Washington Commanders in Week 18, who are already guaranteed a playoff spot. It's just some light seeding. I guess the Cowboys did beat the Commanders earlier this season, so the Cowboys could finish 8-9, or they could finish 7-10. But either way, the feeling is that Jerry Jones is going to want to go in a different direction. And so, just on Thursday, the reporting came out that Mike McCarthy could set his sights on the Bears head coaching job if he moves on from Dallas. I think that's how Jeremy Fowler worded it, that Mike McCarthy could have interest in this Bears job. Now, again, this is not saying the Bears have interest in Mike McCarthy. It's saying Mike McCarthy could have interest in the Bears. Very different dynamic there. First, he would have to get fired by the Cowboys, which, if he's fired by the Cowboys, do you want the Cowboys, failed head coach by that definition? I mean, if it's not good enough for the Cowboys, is that good enough for the Bears? Like, yeah, okay, he finished 7 and he's going to finish either 7-10 or 8-9 this season. Is that the coach you want to bring in? Because, okay, you can point to Mike McCarthy's record overall as a head coach. He's generally had a lot of success throughout his career. He's over 61% career win percentage. His last 3 years in Dallas before this were 12-5, 12-5, 12-5. He's had them as a playoff team fairly consistently. And yet, how often has it really felt like the Cowboys are a super well-coached team? I think there was a time there, like last year when Dan Quinn was running that defense, where you felt like, man, they really were clicking on all cylinders on defense, and Kellen Moore at times running that offense had them going well, but we kind of think of those as those coordinators, right? Like Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator there who jumped, after things kind of, there were some disagreements, I think, with Mike McCarthy there. And now he's the Eagles offensive coordinator, and they're, picking back up that offense where they had been struggling before. And we've seen Dan Quinn go to Washington and be great there. You can give Mike McCarthy credit for hiring good coordinators then. I'm okay with that, although we've seen he hired Mike Zimmer to be the defensive coordinator, and their defense has been one of the worst defenses in football this season. So can he consistently hire good coordinators, or only sometimes? Because we saw that in Green Bay too, with someone like Dom Capers for a while in there, where maybe it works for a little bit, but after a while there were a lot of calls for changing the defensive coordinator in Green Bay, even though they were winning. His last few years, 10-6, 10-6, 7-9, 4-7-1, but it's just not clean. It's not pretty. There's always some blemishes along the Mike McCarthy record here, because it's he won the Super Bowl and has a 61% winning percentage and went 15-1 one year, but at the same time you had Aaron freaking Rodgers and you won one Super Bowl, only made it to one Super Bowl, and 2 NFC Championship games? Definitely the one against the Bears. They went in 2016 as well. Maybe a couple NFC Championship games, but it still feels like he largely underachieved. And this is tricky because it's we would trade our last 10 years for Mike McCarthy's last 10 years, right? I mean, if you could say, hey, we're going to win 61% of our games over the next 10 years, that averages about a 10-win season. If you're saying you're on average, you're going to go 10-7 now in the modern NFL, I think we would all say that's an upgrade from where the Bears are now. I mean, it's clearly an upgrade. Would we all take that? I mean, it's a question, I guess, how high do you want to aim here? Because the ceiling might be a little limited there. We haven't seen him have consistent playoff success at all. And we've seen his teams underachieve a lot consistently. And it feels like the Kliff Kingsbury thing where it's like, isn't he kind of just is who he is as a head coach right now? A coach who can get you your 10 wins and not much more? 10 wins and a 10 regular season wins and a playoff win every year. I mean, that's better than what the Bears have had in the last couple decades, since Lovie Smith. But like, is that as high as we want to aim? Like, don't we want to aim for better? Like, isn't the whole point of like, hey, you got the quarterback, you got a little bit of a roster coming together here. Like, let's go to the moon instead of like, let's go to South America, like I'm thinking like a trip, right? Like let's go somewhere exotic. Let's go somewhere far away. Well, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's cool to go to, if you've never been to South America, it'd be cool to go to South America, but like, don't we want to go to the moon? Like if the moon's the Super Bowl here and South America is like the divisional round of the playoffs, like, yes, getting there is better than not getting there, but we want higher. Like we should hold this team and this city and this franchise to higher expectations than what Mike McCarthy has been able to accomplish over the course of his career. Like, I think McCarthy would make sense like 2022. Like when you're still tearing down the roster, like Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, like when the Bears hired Matt Eberflus, that feels like a time when Mike McCarthy would have made some sense. When you're gonna get worse and you need a veteran head coach to hold it all together and say, hey, we're losing some talent here, but you've run locker rooms for a long time. You know this league. Like, can you just sort of steady the ship? And then, after 3 or 4 years of steady Mike McCarthy, you decide, do we need to do better or not? But at least like he gets you through the tough times. But the Bears are at the point in the team building process right now where they should be through the tough times. This is supposed to be the end of the tough times. And the next head coach is supposed to take them to new heights. And McCarthy is not the coach to take you to new heights. McCarthy is the coach to try and get you back to 500-ish, but not the coach to get you back to Super Bowls, period. That just hasn't been something he's been able to consistently do. And I would rather see the Bears swing for the fences for a coach that can take you all the way, as opposed to like Mike McCarthy kind of feels like more the safe option there. Like he and Pete Carroll might be in a similar boat. Yeah, okay, you know what you're getting, and that's consistency, but how much more than that are you really going to get here? And that's, I think, what is so off-putting about Mike McCarthy. Plus, he just carries himself kind of like his vibes are just not great, right? Like there's sort of an oafiness to him that where it feels he's not a dumb person, but he just like kind of looks dumb and kind of talks dumb. And it doesn't inspire like innovation and at the cutting edge of NFL success. And that's part of like, it just feels like, he's kind of been through this and like, what is the third head coaching tenure for him going to be the one where he, really cements his legacy as a Super Bowl champion, or is he just going to keep kind of floundering until, the end of his career here? Like that's kind of the fear with Mike McCarthy. Like he's 61. He's not old, but he's not young either. And he's been doing this for 24 years in the NFL and 18 as a head coach. Like that's 24 years as a coordinator and a head coach. I think he was an assistant for longer than that. Like, is he going to become better all of a sudden? Like, or is he just going to be the same 10 wins and disappointment? Like, let's hope for higher and hope for better from the Chicago Bears, especially when you have a quarterback like Caleb Williams. Like, okay, like that's the thing with Mike McCarthy. If Caleb Williams was Aaron Rodgers, which he's not, but like, let's say hypothetically Caleb Williams becomes Aaron Rodgers. With Mike McCarthy, are you only guaranteed one Super Bowl then? Like, again, we'll take it's hard because like, well, what are we? Picky, but we only want one Super Bowl is not good enough. But like if you have Aaron Rodgers, it's not good enough. Like if you have Tom Brady, it's not, one Super Bowl would not have been good enough, and it wasn't good enough in Green Bay. Packers fans were ready to move on from Mike McCarthy. Cowboys fans were ready to move on from Mike McCarthy. So why should Bears fans want to embrace Mike McCarthy with open arms, especially because he's an ex-Packers coach? Like the guy the Packers didn't want and upgraded from, you're getting their sloppy seconds or like sort of like thirds now because he's been bounced around. No thanks. Let's not do Mike McCarthy. Let's not do Kliff Kingsbury, and let's sure as hell not do Jon Gruden. Let's look at more of the good candidates, the Ben Johnsons of the world, maybe even Mike Vrabel in that category. We'll have plenty of time to go through this Bears coaching search once the regular season concludes this weekend with Bears-Packers on Sunday. We previewed that game on yesterday's Crossover Thursday podcast, so go make sure you take a listen to that if you haven't heard that already. And we'll be back on Monday to break down everything that happens in that game. And if there are any big changes on Black Monday for the Chicago Bears, we'll have that covered for you as well. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, each and every day. I hope that when you make Locked On Bears your first listen, then you're tuning in and you're getting another opportunity to bear down.